Welcome to Living Out Loud with your host, Jess Phillips, where we talk all things addictions, codependency, relationships, and the good, bad, and ugly in between. Hi, everybody. My name is Jess Phillips. I'm super grateful you're here. I'm a master's level clinician and a relationship and attachment trauma coach. I help freedom-seeking women regain their confidence, master their triggers, and communicate their needs so they can finally put an end to toxic relationships, low self-worth, feeling like an imposter, and become more authentic, trusting, and secure. I know exactly what it feels like to be spinning in circles, stuck in obsession, and living life with all or nothing thinking. After years of failed relationships, impulsive decisions, yo-yo dieting, and riding emotional roller coasters, I knew I needed to get to the root of my issues and that I couldn't go on like this any longer. And that's exactly why I created the 10-week Secure Self-Coaching Program. I was tired of wasting time and money on professionals that didn't understand me. And I knew that trying to fix my own problems with the same thinking that got me there wasn't going to help me get any closer to my goals. If this sounds like you, feel free to send me a message and we'll set up a free consultation call to see if my program is right for you. You can find the link to my website in the show notes. Now back to the show. Enjoy. Welcome, everyone, to the Living Out Loud podcast with your host, Jess Phillips. Super excited for today's episode. I am interviewing my friend, Dan Griffin, who I had the pleasure of meeting on my most recent trip to Mexico. So far, what I know of Dan, he is an author. He does so much work in the recovery space, specifically with men, why I'm super interested in having him on the podcast today. Because as all my listeners know, I work with some men too, but primarily women, and I'm super excited to get a man's take on a lot of my questions. So please help me welcome Dan.
Hi, Jess.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good.
I was gonna do a Spanish accent, and then I thought, oh, I don't know, maybe not. That might not even go over well. You know,
They weren't there.
in this day and age.
That's
in
it.
this day and age.
You know,
Yeah.
but the listeners weren't there to experience what we experienced in Mexico, you know?
What happened? What truly? And yet we all stayed. Well, I stayed sober. I can't say it. I'll speak for myself.
Not everybody, but the people who needed to stay sober stayed sober.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's right. The people who wanted to.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. It was such a great trip. It was so awesome to meet you there.
Yeah. You too.
Yeah, and it was just
a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun.
It was a blast. I really held on to these memories, and not that I was not expecting much, but I had never been to an all-inclusive sober before. So when I first got the invite, I knew it was going to be fun. Obviously wanted to support my friends in their wedding, but I was like, oh man, because when I travel, I'm quite adventurous and I like to, travel different places and do hikes and tours and whatever. And I was like, oh my God, we're going to be stuck on a beach in a hotel with just free booze. And I don't know how the food's going to be. So I went in, but story of my life, I went in with pretty low expectations. And I was on the flight home and I was like, that was the fucking best trip ever. It was just a total blast. There were so many characters there.
Yeah, no, it was. I had kind of a similar thought. My wife was actually she's like, Dan, you're going to an all-inclusive. That's the last place you want to go.
Yeah.
And just from our conversations, that's just not my thing,
yeah.
right? I wouldn't choose to do that. It was great.
Yeah.
It was great. And frankly, I mean, the only thing I'm bummed about is that I missed out on the actual restaurants that were there because I wasn't paying attention to needing, reservations and thought I could just walk in and be like, come on, just let me in.
That's what we do.
But a lot of fun, met some really great people, even though it was all Canadians, I still felt welcome. I understood you all for the most part,
We're nice people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we all had a hard time with the currency exchange. That was a real hot topic for at least 5 days.
Hot topic. It was. Some people got a little dramatic about it, but but overall, yeah, no, it was great, and it was a great experience, because, I mean, in relevance to our conversation today, I've known Chris for years. I was meeting Krista and Cam for the first time. Whole thing was the house that sobriety built. I mean, like it was all recovery.
Yeah.
And, even though everybody at the wedding was not in recovery or sober,
Hmm.
um, it was still very much a celebration of recovery, breaking cycles of devastating addiction for generations, and just celebrating like what recovery can be. And Cam, has the beauty because like I have a 15-year-old, and she has no idea what she's been born into,
Right.
or maybe said differently, no idea what she could have
Could have
been
been born
born
into.
into,
Yeah, agreed.
right? And the same with Cam. I mean, he's just living his life, loving it, just having a
Hmm.
blast and doing all his stuff, and just the love from his parents and then the family and the surrounding friends. And it was wonderful.
Yeah.
It was really wonderful.
Yeah. And you really put it into context, because I don't know about you, but I can still get very excited about things and quickly turn things into like more than they need to be. I don't know. I don't know if you can relate. I don't know if you can relate. Or
I don't know if I saw that from you in the first 10 minutes I met you.
all it took was like a mariachi band at dinner, and I was fucking stoked. I was like, oh my God, I'm never going to bed
Let's
again. Sign
go.
me up. Let's go. But
Let's
I
go.
remember the
Yeah.
actual wedding day, like even the moment that I arrived there, there was people everywhere. I was meeting all of her friends, all of his friends, all of her family, and I'm just like overstimulated. And then I saw the beach and the water, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I'm very lucky today at almost 18 years sober. I don't walk around thinking, oh God, am I close to drinking? Am I in danger? But I can quickly be in danger of being overstimulated or too much excitement. And I remember the
Yeah.
wedding day, and you kind of just pulled everybody together. And I had met you quickly the day before, but that day it was such an exciting day for everybody, and everybody was running around trying to get organized. And you really reined a bunch of us in, and you were like, you really calmed me down that morning, and you were highlighting exactly what you just said. A lot of us, we don't get to have a life where we drink and party and also get the other life too. So when you kind of sat us down and we all grouped together in the hotel room and we had a nice little recovery circle, I was just like, like really grounded. And I was like, okay, champ, like, let's tone it down a little bit. And then you were highlighting your relationship with Chris and just all the stuff that you guys had been through and your own recovery. It was very helpful. That it would have been very helpful the
Mm.
next morning too, but that morning was very helpful. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah,
Yeah. Well,
basically, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, I mean, like, I think that's what I've learned. Like, look, I am an adrenaline junkie.
Hmm.
I'm an endorphin junkie. I am an oxytocin junkie.
Hmm.
I respond differently to chemicals. So when you and I were emailing yesterday, I was sitting in the waiting room for my colonoscopy.
Oh boy.
And so I had a colonoscopy yesterday. And like, I don't know how other people respond to like those drugs, but it was like the staff were surprised at how high I was.
I just got such a visual.
And my wife was not. And yet she's only known me in recovery. She met me at 9 years of recovery.
Right.
And so I know I'm chemically sensitive, and so as part of that, like that's I could see it with everybody there, and I could feel it kind of. I was like, oh, we're gonna miss this, man. We're gonna miss this
Hmm.
if we don't stop.
Hmm. Mm.
We have to stop. As people in recovery, we have to stop.
Hmm.
We have to learn to pause over and over and just like breathe. Like, I mean, these days everybody's talking about breathing and all that sort of stuff. But like, for I like to say like, for normies, it's life affirming,
Hmm.
right? For us, it's life saving.
Yeah.
Like to practice that is life saving because we get to experience life. Otherwise, we miss it. We miss it because of the stress and the fear and the insecurity and all the emotional turmoil that we're kind of feeding inside of us because, we're so used to not being present.
Yeah.
And I didn't want anybody to miss like what was happening and how beautiful it was,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's so well put because it's true. In the blink of an eye, it's just too much coffee, too much sugar-free Red Bull, and I'm gonzo's. You know what I mean?
And you were gonzos a couple times.
Listen, you
And I had to be careful. Like, I mean, I was on the, you know, I mean, it was like kind of like I know me, right? If you
yeah,
give me caffeine, if you give me too much sugar, too much chocolate,
yeah.
like I've got to have parameters because otherwise, well, the other thing is, and you and I talked about this, and I'm very open about this now. I didn't used to be, but I'm also bipolar,
Mm-hmm.
and so being bipolar, like it's a big deal for me, and it's taken me a long time to, one, get really comfortable with it, and two, to really get stable medication for it, and how I take care of myself just in general. You know, I don't believe medication will ever be a panacea
Mm-hmm.
or the sole answer, but I believe it can be very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I had to like be really mindful what I was eating, what I was saying. Like it's for me, I feel it inside of me, this kind of hyperness,
Mm-hmm.
and I either take some deep breaths and I kind of let it go, or I feed it, and then it's like the Tasmanian devil,
Yeah.
you know, the cartoon in
Yeah.
the United States that you're probably not familiar with.
Listen, I'm not that young, okay? I know who the Tasmanian devil is. We have that. We have TVs in Canada. Did you know that?
You
Yeah.
just got them
Yeah, colored. Colored. They're not flat screen yet. They're still the big
colored. My
TVs up
God.
here. Yeah, in our
Well, wait till you get these things called smartphones.
yeah, in our igloos, you know? Yeah. Yeah, yeah, we're doing all
with
right.
with your Mountie boyfriends that are riding riding moose to work.
I know you guys really think that way, though. That's the joke. You know what I mean? Americans really think
No,
Canadians are like, I think probably vice versa, too. It's a very,
I don't even think I thought that ever. But I mean, I've done so much work in Canada. I just like I always want to say Canada, but I've done so much work in Canada that I'm just like maybe the first time I was like, oh, aside from like the little accent, it's like we're very similar.
yes, we are.
I mean, in 2 weeks I might be moving my family there, but that's a whole nother story.
Yeah, we're definitely not going there today. Right? We're definitely not going
We
there
don't need to.
today.
We don't need to go there, but I'm just saying you might be seeing a lot of Americans
That's
coming.
okay. You're always welcome. Come to Montreal if
Always
you do.
welcome.
Yeah.
Always
Yeah.
welcome. All right.
Okay, so tell me, I
So
really, like the moment I met you, and I think this is also such a cool thing about the people that I meet in recovery. It's like, it's almost like this like secret fight club where it's like I can feel their energy and their like potential and just the strong characters that they are. And I remember when I first met you, I was like, yep, I'm going to be talking to this guy on the podcast. Like your energy was awesome. Chris had shared a little bit with me about what you do. So yeah, basically talk to us about what you do, especially in your line of work and especially for men. I find that super fascinating. And I want to
yeah,
hear more about what it is you're currently up to today.
sure. So I mean, I'll give you the kind of somewhat brief overview or kind of history of how it ended up this way. I had a very interesting experience with my own masculinity, right? So I'm in recovery. I've been in recovery for 30 years. I got sober when I was 21. So I was just a kid. I was just out of college. I was super immature and just super scared, just really, really scared. And you wouldn't know it really by looking at me. But the other thing is that when I was like 13 or 14 and the other boys like were getting taller and stuff, I wasn't getting taller. And then 14, I wasn't getting taller. Then I go to high school and I'm still not getting taller. I haven't hit puberty. And it was humiliating. And I had humiliating experiences. I got teased. I got put in trash cans, stuffed in lockers. I would, my sister was 2 years older and she was friends with some of the guys on the varsity soccer team and I was playing JV and so they just hazed me and it was humiliating though. And like at the depth of kind of masculinity is this idea of power and having power. And yet almost every man has some story of like how he felt completely powerless and not a man and not able to either defend himself or somebody else. Like almost every man had, if you ask a man to tell you that story, his experience with that, many of them will just start breaking down, especially if they're in recovery, because they're already kind of in touch with some of that. But so I ended up getting treated with growth hormone when I was at the end of my sophomore year, beginning of my junior year. And it was humiliating as well, and it was embarrassing, and I had a lot of shame around that. I couldn't talk about it. And then on top of that, I lived in an alcoholic home with a very mean and often violent father who would make fun of me as well. So there was really no safe place for me. But what I like to say, Jess, that happened for me as a result of that experience is I stepped outside of kind of traditional masculinity. Up until that point, I was like a guy's guy. I played all the sports. I was popular with the girls. I was a good student. I mean, I kind of was like the all-around dude. And then this just knocked me on my ass, right? But then I kind of stood outside of traditional masculinity for a long time, and I just kind of noticed it. And I was like, I think in many ways, right, when you don't feel like you're part of something, you have to deconstruct it in order to find peace with not being a part of it, right? That's what people of color and marginalized groups say all the time about the dominant group. They say, oh, well, we understand you very well because you don't let us in. You don't let us in, and in order to make peace with not being in, we need to cut you down and deconstruct you and analyze you. So that's like part of what I did in many ways, but I didn't really realize I was doing it. Then I got into college. Well, I started drinking in high school. Then I grew. I'm like, you met me. You would never know by looking at me like that's part of my history. And then I was in college, but I still was like, I don't want to be one of the boys, like there's some ugliness here that I just don't want to be a part of. And so I got into sociology. Then I was invited by a woman on campus I ended up joining a service fraternity, not a fraternity, a service fraternity. It's very different. It's when the whole focus is on service. And I was invited by some people to join that. And I joined that, still drinking tons and all that stuff. But one of the women from the fraternity, she was like, I want to invite you to take this sociology of women class. And I was like, sociology of women? And she's like, Dan, it'll be all women. I was like,
Wait a minute.
So if you want to get a guy into feminism, just do that, right? And so I took that class and it changed my life. Because you'll realize, look, there's a lot of guys out there, and guys I respect, they say chick and girl and all that sort of stuff, but you will never hear that language come out of my mouth. I was taught very, very clearly, like, yeah, well, what about, women? They call each other girl and bitch and all that stuff. It's like, okay, fine, that's their journey. But the truth is, it coming out of the mouths of men is different, right? And so you just won't hear me call women girls or chicks or anything. I mean, I think you met me, right? So I work really hard to have lines because I want to be funny. I want to be stupid. I want to be goofy, And I want to push the boundaries because I think we're getting way too serious in this world as far as what's funny or what's not funny. While at the same time, though, I take very seriously. It's like I tell my audiences when I do public speaking or some training, I say, my intention is to be provocative, but never offensive, right? So is it offensive to call you a girl? I don't know. You could say better than I can, but all I know is that as a man of a dominant group, right? Uber privileged, white, heterosexual, upper middle class, well-educated, all of it. I have a responsibility to pay attention to the language that I use. And so I learned that in this class, and I learned about like sexual assault and I learned about all this stuff. And I asked my professor, I said, is anybody looking at this stuff for men? And she was like, I don't know. Why don't you go do some research? I think she knew, but she just wanted me to do some research. So I I did the research. I ended up doing my senior thesis on masculinity. I went and did my graduate work on the social construction of masculinity and the culture of Alcoholics Anonymous. It was the first qualitative study ever looking at that, ever done. I've written some books, since then, A Man's Way Through the 12 Steps, A Man's Way Through Relationships. I've got several curricula that treatment programs use. I've got 4 curricula coming out like this year or early because we kind of had just like this really bountiful work product kind of development happen. And so I just released a curriculum called Healing Men's Pain, and it's a male-focused trauma responsive curriculum. We developed and I just released the first trauma-informed curriculum for dads and working with dads, and it's called Amazing Dads. And that was released earlier this year. So then we've partnered also with this amazing woman, Dr. Sophia Murphy, and we did Amazing Moms, and we did Healing Women's Pain, and both of those curricula are coming out probably early next year. So all of that to say, I have found it to be really, really important to address gender and gender constructs and the narratives and stories we have about our gender in recovery. And I think recovery gets better. I will actually make a qualitative statement. I think recovery gets better when we do that. I think the focus for the most part has been on women, and women tend to be like, yeah, let's empower ourselves and let's do this and all that sort of stuff. But it's not as strong for men, and it's unfortunate. And it enables a lot of guys in recovery, I think, to show up in ways that, I don't know if they're paying attention. I don't know if they just don't think it's a big deal, but like just went on this trip to Japan. It was all guys in recovery, and some of the guys in recovery, their behavior, their language, I just was like, you got to be kidding me. You got to be kidding me. This is how we're acting and behaving. And, a couple of the guys were like newer recovery, but most of them had 10 plus years and several of them 20 plus. And I was just like, and if you, my book, A Man's Way Through the 12 Steps, which was written in 2009, and it's done pretty well with Hazelden, but that book opens with an anecdote from when my father died. My father died of alcoholism in 1995, and I was already kind of exposed to these ideas because it was my senior year of college, and so I graduated college. I went to graduate school. My dad died a month after I got there. But I met these guys, and when I met these guys at my dad's funeral, they were amazing. They so like went out of their way for me. They're like, oh, you're Owen's son and this and that, and we've got a retreat coming up, so we're going to pay for you to come back for this retreat. We're going to pay for your hotel, and we're going to pay for your airfare. We're going to pay for blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then they pick me up. I come back and they pick me up in the car, and immediately in the car and the whole freaking ride there, it was just like all these sexist jokes. I was so disappointed because I was like, God, I thought these were my guys.
Yeah.
And then I'm in a car with them, and I'm like, can these still be my guys?
Yeah.
And so here I am just 2 weeks ago, and I'm still asking the same goddamn question. Can these still be my guys? Because I think for me, ultimately, recovery is about congruence. You get to a certain point, and if you're not congruent in your recovery, well, I was going to be very judgmental. Let me say it differently. For me personally, I don't want recovery that's not congruent. I don't want to be a guy with other guys that's different from the guy I am with my wife and my daughter, that's different than I am in meetings. I don't want to be the guy in meetings who's talking all this spiritual stuff and sounding all great about loving people and being kind and all that stuff, and then turning around and saying a bunch of sexist or homophobic shit and thinking somehow that you can reconcile that. That's incongruent to me. And so that's what I work with guys on. But I mean, I think the other thing is that I've done a lot of work around this. And so I don't take for granted the fact that some people haven't been exposed, or not some, a lot of guys haven't been exposed to this.
Yeah.
They haven't gotten it. And so I try not to be judgmental, but I also try not to be passive.
Right.
when it comes up. And so like all the guys I sponsor, they always start by talking about chicks and girls. And I'm like, you probably want to change, how at least you talk to women, talk about women with me. But it's so, so much bigger than that, because I think what I really, really want men to do, this is the bottom line, right? I want men to look critically at the scripts they have about masculinity and the men they are. And then I want them to look at those scripts and choose which are the ones that really, really reflect the men they want to be. And then really try to live those scripts as much as possible. And do it as consciously as possible, understanding that they will make tons and tons of mistakes, but that there's a true north that they're aiming for, and that it comes back to looking for some level of congruence in the way they show up as men in recovery.
So refreshing to hear all of this, because it's a big ask. And I would probably say safely for men and for women, but people who come into recovery, right, have lived a life of excitement, risk, trauma, chaos. So when a lot of people get sober, it takes a long time for the language to change, for the old ideas to change. But you're right. There's so many like gender specific differentials where it's like women are taught to act like this and men are taught to act like this, and it's true. I don't hear as often somebody saying to the men like, hey, let's cool it a little bit, let's practice what we preach, let's cool it. So you were obviously sober when you went back to school, did your undergrad, did your master's. What was your experience like in early recovery? Like, did this come to you naturally in early recovery, the congruence, or is this something that you learned?
No, God, no. I mean, it's only been, look, I'm still incongruent. I will always have incongruencies, but I strive for greater and greater congruency, because if you're not incongruent, you're perfect. And so nobody's perfect. But early recovery, what's interesting is, and I share this like in a lot of the talks I do, it's like I got sober and into recovery at the same time my eyes opened about gender and kind of feminism. And it was a very powerful intersection. It was very, very powerful, because it was like, because I was not that guy. I'd be the first to tell sexist jokes. I talked about chicks and women, and I disrespected women, and I was afraid of women and insecure around women, and couldn't acknowledge that. And so instead I would be a dick and, all of that sort of stuff. And just in the guise or in the need to fit in, I would, tell stupid jokes. And then it just stopped, and I stopped doing that. And then early recovery, I was in graduate school. I took a year off, and I don't know. My first year of recovery was such a struggle. I just was doing the best I could. I was in a small town in Virginia, and I just was really, I think, doing the best I could. I don't think these ideas were really internalized at all. They were in my head a little bit because I was applying for graduate school, and so I was talking about it. Then I got to graduate school, and then, the interesting thing, Jess, about graduate school, because this was a long time ago, this was almost 30 years ago, and there was no such thing as men's studies at the time. There was very, very little of that, around academia. So I basically had to do women's studies and try to pull in my focus and my stuff. And then there were professors who were like supportive, and then there were professors who weren't. And then I'm sure I didn't do the best job of communicating how I wanted to communicate, because I'd feel like left out or felt like I was getting a cold shoulder, and so I'd react to that. So I was trying, I met some wonderful people who had similar feelings and thoughts about this stuff, who were reconciling feminism with 12-step culture. All of my research papers were about that. And so I think it's just been, it was easier. Well, no, like in academia, I felt a little bit outside because I was so focused on recovery
Mm.
and like personal growth, and like they were just super academic and stuff. And then in recovery, you know, people just weren't for the most part thinking like the way I was thinking. And so it was kind of hard. And I would say it's always kind of had its element of feeling a little left out,
Mm-hmm.
of feeling like, you know, are these my people? Am I going to find my people? And so I've just kind of mostly concluded that there's a lot of guys that I like, but there's only a few that I really consider my people.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'd love to be the guy who has tons of people, quote unquote,
Mm-hmm.
but I just don't think that's my path. I don't think that's, you know, for me. And so it's been interesting. And for the most part, I haven't yet found the way to really integrate my work with my personal recovery, because I never ever, like, I don't talk about my work in meetings,
Mm-hmm.
even though they're all men's meetings. So it'd be like the perfect place to do it,
Mm-hmm.
because it just seems like a boundary.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like an integrity issue. Like I had a guy call me, I don't know, the other day, and he was like, I was in Louisiana and we went to this store, the recovery store or something, and my friend found this book and it was called A Man's Way Through the 12 Steps, and it was you wrote it. Oh my God. Like, you know, and the excitement on his voicemail was like really cool,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and it was really cool to see somebody. But he was like, I didn't know that you were an author. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's like, that's not my approach.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I get it. And how did you move into that? So how did you go from, because, you know, I'll speak for myself, but for a lot of people that I've either worked with in recovery or spoken to, a lot of us struggle with this feeling of, like you mentioned it before, right? The impending doom, the fear, the not enoughness, the low self-esteem. So how did you move through all of that with a diagnosis of bipolar and still become an author, a father, a husband, somebody in long-term recovery? Like, how do you do these very big things?
I like how you say that that way, because it feels good to hear it put that way. Because and then I was like, oh wow, that really was it was a big deal.
Big deal.
No, I look, I felt I felt called to do this work. I felt it important to put this message out. I didn't see anybody else doing it, and I think you and I talked a little bit about this in Mexico, but like, I mean, I feel really grounded now, right? But I was not. I was not. How did I do it? I didn't do it well, frankly, if I'm going to be very, very honest. I didn't do it well. There was a massive incongruence with me. I have struggled with anger and rage and abusive behavior, especially, ironically, abusive behavior towards women.
Mm.
And it was horrible, and it was like a horrible secret, I guess you could say. A lot of shame around that. I couldn't acknowledge it. It would mean I'm like my father, and I mean, I don't know. There was a lot of blocks for me in truly addressing it, and so it only got worse, or didn't certainly get better. Then there was a massive imposter syndrome. I mean, I was at a certain point. I was like, there's a program here called the Meadows.
Mm-hmm.
And they're pretty well known for addiction and trauma. They've been a leader in addiction and trauma for decades, right? Before, the buzzword of trauma was around, the Meadows was really kind of banging that drum.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a senior fellow there. I mean, Peter Levine, Claudia Black, Bessel van der Kolk, Tian Dayton, they were senior fellows, and I was a senior fellow. Now, that's crazy. And not one moment that I was a senior fellow for those 2 years did I feel like I was deserved to be there, or did I feel good about it.
Mm.
And, that really sucks.
Mm.
And I even talked to the CEO later, and I said, you know what? I said, I wanted that so badly that when you asked me, I said yes. But if I had stopped and really stepped back and said, am I ready for this? Like, am I really truly ready for this? I hope and I want to believe that my answer would have been no, let's wait. Let's wait, right? The pause, right? But I was on this kind of wheel of like, I need more accolades to try to quiet the imposter voice that's telling me, right? So, like, I put out the first book and it didn't become a New York Times bestseller, and then it didn't sell 100,000 copies, and then it was this, and so then I'm a failure, and so then I put out a second book and it doesn't become a New York Times bestseller, and it doesn't sell even close to as many copies as I've sold with the other one. And then I do this and I do that and I do this, and it's like this. It's such a painful journey, or it's such a painful thing when you experience the things that you've envisioned happening and coming true, and you can't enjoy them. And you can't simply give yourself enough of a break to say, hey, I deserve this. So when you just described that, like, how did I do that? I stayed in recovery. I've always been committed to being the best I can be. I've always committed to getting extra help. I don't believe in the term outside help that we use sometimes in the 12 steps. It's just help. It's all help. Outside help has this pejorative sort of connotation to it. Like, oh, well, you didn't work the steps well enough. You needed outside help. And it's like, no, we just needed some additional help. You know, in fact, I caution anybody on thinking the 12 steps sufficient for what we need to be truly happy, joyous, and free. I mean, the founder, Bill Wilson, certainly didn't think that. He was constantly looking for things. So I know this is a little bit off topic as far as like the men's piece, but I will say that journey has given me a lot of compassion for men, because men are taught to strive to be the best. And we are taught to strive to be the ultimate provider and the ultimate protector. And we are taught to have all the money, all the accolades, the really, really hot, partner, but we're never encouraged to enjoy it. And we're never encouraged to tell ourselves we deserve it. And we're never encouraged to get it the right way. It's just that when people don't get it the right way, they get punished and they get shamed but it's like, what did you want from me? I mean, you told me that I'm nothing if I'm not all of these things, and I'm trying to be these things at any cost and any way I can. And we lose ourselves in that chase. And I mean, the funniest thing is there's probably even going to be people listening who are in this space right now who still aren't going to be able to hear it. Because that was me. I don't know. I don't know what prevented me from being like as honest as I needed to be about like saying, I don't feel good. Like, I don't know. So it's like God works in mysterious ways. I trust the process infinitely. And I just think we need a much, much greater conversation around truly healthy, conscious masculinity in our recovery cultures, in our society. But it's not prescriptive for me. There's a lot of people out there doing men's work and stuff, and it's like they're prescribing what it is supposed to look like. And I think it's a very personal journey for a man, for him to really, really navigate for himself. I might offer parameters. I might offer, something that says, hey, if you really want a vision of the man you want to be, here are some principles that, conscious, that healthy masculinity seems to resonate with. But I would never attempt to, even if I'm challenging guys on their behavior, it's never about questioning their worth. It's about questioning the behavior, and if that's really reflective of who they want to be. Or are they, it's like, are you just playing a role right now to fit in, to get acceptance, to get laughs? That sort of thing.
I appreciate you sharing all that. I know we are pressed for time, and I will try to respect that as much as possible. But I do have a quick last question Because I feel like what you just explained when you were out at the Meadows and you were with all these heavy hitters, I primarily see it with people who are in recovery, right? That idea of imposter syndrome, or maybe the idea of not enough, kind of like filling that hole in the soul. And we think the degree or the job or the partner is going to do it. But the more and more that I work with quote unquote normies, they have it too. So looking back on that experience, do you feel like you probably should have waited because of the incongruence that you were living, that you weren't being totally honest with yourself? Or was it because...
No, I think it's two different things, right? I mean, when I say I should have waited, what I mean is that where I was at with my career, with my work development, my work product, my confidence in it, all of that, I don't think I was quite ready. So that's what I mean. But I do wish I would have had the ability to say, because I agree, I think imposter syndrome is far from being relegated to people in recovery. But I will say this, kind of as we wrap, is like, I love the 12-step culture and I love 12-step recovery, but I would never try to live without like therapy, without meditation. I mean, like real, like a deep meditation practice, but like programs like CODA and ACA and Al-Anon are so helpful and healthy. And that's what I see so many people with long-term 10 plus years of recovery struggling with, is it's all the stuff that the 12 steps can be helpful for. But it's like I tell people, it's like with trauma, right? So a lot of my work is around trauma. And I tell people, I'm like, look, it's just another lens. The 12 steps is a lens that you watch, you look at life through, and then trauma is another lens, and it gives you a different way to see the world,
Yeah.
So no, this has been great. I apologize that we are cutting it a little
perfect
short,
and you can come back on anytime.
But maybe there's a part two.
There's always a part two. We'll never run out of things to talk about. Just quickly, if anybody would like to find your work, you have an awesome website with really cool like additional prompts that I was going through and kind of like worksheets and things like that. So one-on-one work, keynote speaking work, what's the best way for people to learn more about your stuff or get a hold of you?
Oh, thanks, Jess. It's been great connecting with you in this context and in this part of our relationship. It's dangriffin.com. So it's DANGRIFFIN.com. That's the website. And then it's dan@dangriffin.com is the email address. And I would love to hear from people, just their thoughts, comments, experiences of what I had to say, our conversation, this podcast, or if I can be helpful in any way would be great.
So awesome. Thank you so much for taking time today to come on. I'm sure everybody got a lot out of it, and to be continued.
Awesome. Thanks, Jess.
Thanks, Dan.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone, for listening and supporting Living Out Loud. Be sure to tune in next week for another fun, juicy episode.